Good morning, or good afternoon, or perhaps good evening. It's wonderful to have people from all over the world participate in this event today. And it's a pleasure and an honor to have Inger Andersen here with us today, Director of the United Nations Environment Program. And she will get a proper introduction from Professor Maria Ivanova, who I will introduce to kick off this discussion. And Maria Ivanova, as you see this book and the book title, which I absolutely encourage you to purchase and dive into, Unep is one of these institutions worldwide that has a huge impact, but has been relatively understudied. And that is a opportunity lost until now, until Maria Ivanova and her team, many of you who you may see here and hear from today, have dived into what makes Unep work. What are the challenges it faces? How can it be improved? And I just wanted to make a quick note about Maria Ivanova, professor in the Conflict Resolution, Human Security and Global Governance Department here at the McCormack Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at UMass Boston, and also director of the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the McCormack Graduate School. She is a unique kind of researcher. In the few moments we had before we started in a quick exchange with Inger Andersen, she mentioned how important Maria was in terms of helping Unep understand who it is and how it works. And that takes an incredibly rare researcher who can have incredible respect for the subjects she studies, but at the same time, pull no punches, takes on truth, takes on evidence in a way that ultimately can help build institutions, build organizations, build the mission and accomplishments of organizations like Unep. And that quality that Maria has sets her apart. And in a way, it also, although as I said, you should buy and read this book, I would imagine that the impact that the research has had goes well beyond this book and the reading of this book, because she understands that when research is done well, it engages the subjects early in an iterative kind of way, in a trust building kind of way, so that the findings and the conclusions can actually be utilized in a way, as I said, to build institutions, to improve operations, and to ultimately, as Unep's mission is, to make the world a better place to live in and a healthier environment for us all to have. So with that, I want to turn it over to Professor Ivanova, and I hope everyone has a delightful event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean Cash. Thank you, Inger Andersen, Executive Director of the Anchor Institution for the Global Environment, the United Nations Environment Program, for joining us in this space. Thank you, everybody, for being here today from far and near, and engaging with us in this dialogue space. Just before I introduce Inger Andersen, I want to point out a few housekeeping notes. Please use the chat. The chat is enabled. Discuss, talk with us. Please use the Q&A and pose questions to Inger Andersen. We will be monitoring the chat. Anna Dubrova, who's a PhD student in our doctoral program in global governance and human security, will monitor the chat, engage with you. Natalia Escobar-Pemberti, who's a graduate of our program and now a professor at EAFIT in Colombia, will monitor the Q&A, and we will engage in a discussion. Moreover, the most productive participant in the chat will get a copy of the book that we will send to you via mail. So we welcome you. I thank the team at UMass Boston, and thank all of you for engaging today. But it is truly a privilege to open this series on Unep at 50 with the Executive Director of the UN Environment Program and Undersecretary General of the United Nations, Inger Andersen. Before joining Unep in 2019, Inger Andersen was the Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, in Switzerland. And prior to her IUCN post, she held several leadership positions at the World Bank, including Vice President of the Middle East and North Africa and Vice President for Sustainable Development. Inger Andersen has more than 30 years of experience in international development economics, in environmental sustainability, strategy, and operations. She has now taken the leadership position of Unep and is leading it into this pivotal moment where Unep is rethinking, reimagining its role in the world as it prepares to celebrate the 50th anniversary in 2022. Today, we launch this series and we engage in a conversation. It is truly an honor to welcome Unep Executive Director Inger Andersen to launch this dialogue series commemorating Unep at 50. Inger, welcome to this space.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you to you for all the work that you've done on Unip all these years.
Thank you. We will start this. This is a conversation. Today, I want us to have a conversation and engage people to the best of our abilities through chat, through the Q&A, in getting to know Unep and getting to know the woman who is heading Unep. So I've written in this book and for quite a while that Unep is the anchor institution for the global environment. You are its 7th executive director. So start us off on this journey. Tell us about Unep. How would you describe it in just a few words for our audience to see where you are, what organization you're heading?
Well, I'm obviously heading a fabulous organization, that goes without saying, but if I have to describe the characteristics of it, I have been quoted as saying that it is the environmental conscience of the United Nations, but also, frankly, of the world, because there are some 50 UN agencies, but only one that deals with states backing. It has universal membership, 193 states, the environmental dimension. And we work in this science policy interface, with science informing us where sort of the barometer of how we're doing and what's happening and what we understand about Earth systems and climate and nature and all the natural systems that we know. But then knowing it is not enough, because we need to do some things. And what are the things we do? And these are the things we do. We either do it through conventions, many of which, if not most, have been born through UNEP, or we do it through the programs, or through technical assistance, or through resolutions that pass through our processes. But in the UN also, and this is maybe what is underrated, but which I'm so proud of since I came on board, we really stood up. And just last week, the chief executive boards endorsed a new strategy for biodiversity, 50 agencies, a common agenda, a common approach to biodiversity. So through the UN system, enabling them, whether you work in UNICEF or WFP or UNDP or wherever, you can look at the world and the impact you have. You must look at it with environment in mind. And that's also our job, so that it's not just what we do, but what we enable others to do that can really enable the entire system to support member states and obviously citizens across the world to ensure environmental stewardship.
That's very interesting, because UNEP was created indeed with the purpose to be the environmental conscience. And I often say, to quoting the documents from 1972, to color the UN environmental and to make other agencies take those issues up. And they have. As you mentioned, the UN system, a lot of the agencies are doing more and more environmental work. But how do we distinguish UNEP? What do you think is UNEP's value added when it has done its job so well of catalyzing this work on environment?
Unfortunately, we haven't done the job as we would like to see, because the environmental indicators across the world are going in the wrong direction. And so, yes, what is wonderful is that whether you take ICAO that deals with airlines, or whether you take ILO that deals with labor, or whether you take UNIDO that deals with industry, each of these are beginning to understand the environmental dimensions. But we need to do more, because the environmental indicators that I mentioned are not going in the direction that we need to see. So each of the UN agencies have a mandate and a mission on a topic, as I mentioned. Ours is environment. We bring that science, we bring that understanding, we bring the common assessments that have been done on all kinds of issues, whether within our house or within other houses, so to speak, and we sort of make it more understandable to the average citizen or the average UN colleague, so that they can take that and make it real in their setting. So the more the rest of the UN system works on environment, the happier I am, because that gives me, not me, but that gives Unep, we grow wings that way, right? We are not in every corner, in every field, and in every industry, but when we take the entire UN system, we actually can begin to have more impact. But clearly there's a lot of work that lies ahead. And so your book also highlights the work, and the to-do list is still long. Let's put it this way.
Oh, on that note, since you mentioned the book, the World Economic Forum in a couple of months ago asked a few champions of nature, 7 people, including yourself, about their must-read books. And you mentioned the untold story of the world's leading environmental institution, Unep at 50, as your must-read book. What are your takeaways from this book? Why did you recommend it as the book to read for a World Economic Forum audience?
Well, so the interesting part is that more and more business leaders are beginning to understand that environmental footprint is, that they need to understand their environmental footprint. And they need to, this idea that you can take out of nature and put it into the economy and make a nice profit, and when you're done with it, you just discard it back into nature as waste or effluents or emissions, it just doesn't work anymore. So reaching into that constituency and making that constituency understand that there is this premier organization, and this premier organization does have for them information that is not without importance to their long-term sustainability and profitability. Because yes, they can cut the proverbial forest empty and have a great quarterly return, but they need to think about the generations that come after them, also in terms of profitability. And the good thing is, and more of these businesses are actually beginning to understand that, but your book sort of crystallizes that. Now, whether every CEO will or will not read it, I am not so sure, but around the WEF, there is a huge audience that read their stuff. And I felt that, and I know that in the WEF and the folks that follow the World Economic Forum, there's a great awareness and understanding and interest in environment. So I felt that it really was important for people to understand that environment is not climate. Climate is part of the broader environmental agenda, and that there are institutions and people who have gone before us, who went before us, who went before us in 1972, who sat down and understood that, and that there is a trajectory and a legacy upon which all of this is built, and also an understanding around multilateralism, that multilateralism is the only way. And now in the pandemic, I think we are seeing this. You can't just think that behind your borders, everything is going to be a-okay. You've got to engage with the rest of the world. That's certainly it for pandemics, and it is most definitely it for environment. So that's why I recommended everyone to take a look at your book.
Thank you. And I do appreciate how you put it in context of the people coming before us, and the ones that come before them, and the ones that come before them. Because if this was indeed my goal when I started writing this book and researching the book, and I have dedicated it to the people who have passed. And I had the rare fortune of actually interviewing the people who imagined the organization and then created it and then led it and then worked for it. And this was truly an honor and a privilege to be able to do as a researcher for an organization that is so premier and is with us within a period that we could actually study. And so I've looked at, as you know, as the leaders of the organization, and I'd like maybe to shift a little bit and understand Unep, the organization, with Inger Andersen, the individual, and talk a little bit about you coming into the organization. What kind of organization did you come into? With what vision did you come into it? And what did you bring to it? I even see in the chat, Jeremy Firestone is asking, what lessons do you take from IUCN to Unep? And how does your IUCN experience color how you look at Unep? So let's talk a little bit about Unep, the institution, and Inger, the individual. How do these fit together?
Well, look, I mean, when I was being interviewed for this job, I said sort of, it's a bit frivolous, but I feel like I've been preparing for this job my entire life. I worked for 12 years in UNDP, working on desertification. I was part of the team that helped establish the Global Environment Facility. But first I worked for the UN Drought and Desertification Office that got transferred from the UN Secretariat to UNDP and called Sudan of Sahelian Office. This is before there was a desertification convention, but I was there when there was no convention. And so, you know, and I was part of beginning the pre-COP for what became UNCCD. And then for the GEF, actually, I was there when Gus Spess was thinking about what would global, he was the head of UNDP, and he was, well, you know, is there something called the global environment, and so on and so forth. And so I was junior enough, but had been on this journey, and then went to the World Bank, and you referenced some of my World Bank career, 15 years at the World Bank, and then IUCN. Point is, coming into UNEP, the premier organization that convenes states on environmental matters, I felt really that this was, and it is, clearly the pinnacle of my career, and I could not have aspired to get to that if I hadn't had the other station stops along the way. And the organization I found is an organization of super dedicated people, people who are, but who also are substantive in their, you know, they come with sectoral depth, many of them, and also very, very much dedicated to the mandate and the mission of the United Nations, the Blue Flag, but also of the UNEP itself. You highlight in your book that it is the only, together with Habitat that came after us, organization that is of the United Nations that is headquartered in the what we refer to as the Global South. We are very, very proud of our headquarters, the most beautiful campus of the UN, hands down, in Nairobi, Kenya. But that has also, as you describe in the book, it become part of our identity and how we have evolved over these 50 years. So I found this amazing organization in this quite stunning place with committed people, but also an organization that has been bruised due to a number of issues. And so when there was a question, what did I take from IUCN? Well, the interesting part about IUCN is that that is older than UNEP. I was there when we celebrated 75th of IUCN, established in 1948. 3 years after the Second World War, people had the wisdom to see that you needed something. And the interesting part about IUCN is, of course, that it combines civil society and member states, or they call them all members. And that gives that broader basis of voice, which is super helpful as a partner to UNEP. And you know, of course, that my predecessor, Achim Steiner, who's a dear friend, went from IUCN to UNEP, and I did the same thing, although he then went to UNDP, but I've done that, so I'm not going to UNDP. So anyway, but the point is that that I think having been at IUCN also anchors you in the conservation side of the business. Of course, Unip's mandate is much broader, but it is a IUCN is also based in science, as indeed is Unip. My own journey, I've been incredibly privileged to work with amazing people along the way. And I will say what characterizes, I would say, everyone who works on environment is that they have a commitment that is, you know, a burning commitment and a dedication that is not just a 9-to-5 thing, and it's not just a career thing, but it is really about the passion for these issues. And that I found, whether I was in UNDP, whether I was at the World Bank, whether I was at IUCN, or indeed at UNEP, that those who work in this field, there is a special, we find each other because there is a special degree of commitment that I have come to love.
Exactly. And how do we keep that alive, and how do we inspire the new generations? Indeed, this is what we do in academia, and I'd love to talk about the role of academia maybe a little bit later. But since we started with IUCN, from the chat, the questions, and you pointed out to Achim Steiner, who is our next speaker in this series on June 3rd. But when we were advertising the event, we also asked for people to submit questions. And another IUCN Director General submitted a question, and that is one of your other predecessors, Julia Marton-Lefebvre. And Julia submitted a question online. And here is her question for Inger Andersen. In 1992, Unep was not given the recognition it might have expected when the so-called Rio Conventions were created on climate, biodiversity, and desertification. Should these 3 conventions be brought closer together? And if so, what would be the desired role for Unep? Julia asks.
Look, I mean, 1992, these 3 conventions had to be set as, well, they were set as the Rio Conventions. We at UNIP, we're proud to host 17 conventions, right? And people think of the Rio Conventions as you know, milestones, and they were, but don't forget that there are the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm and Minamata Convention that deals with chemicals and waste and hazardous materials that are absolutely critical. They are on the brown side of the agenda, but absolutely critical to your and mine and our children's safety. Don't forget that the Convention of Migratory Species, don't forget that CITES, which had a starting life in IUCN, but then moved to UNEP, is important. Or forget the 2 plant-based conventions that live in FAO, or Ramsar that lives in IUCN, etc. So there are many, the tapestry is embroidered because, and it's embroidered over time and space. And so there will be those that feel that these should have been sort of under the aegis of UNEP, but you know what, climate change is this existential threat that I think it is only right that it is operating at the level of reporting directly to the Secretary General. Mm. And indeed, we have a Secretary General who's taking it extremely seriously. And you've heard his State of the Planet speech, and you see his Twitter feed, and you see how he's relentlessly pushing for ambitions for Glasgow. So we live in a hierarchical world, and having the Secretary General have a direct report in on that convention, as well as on other critical issues, matters. Now, the good thing is that with whether it was Christiana or whether it's Patricia now, there has always been a very super tight connection with the UNEP executive director. And I think Patricia and I, we exchange on more than a regular basis. And so that matters. And the same with Ibrahim Cho. And I will say Elizabeth Marima, who is the head of the Biodiversity Convention, similarly so. I think that if one could, wave a magic wand and say, everybody stops, all conventions evaporate, and we start from scratch, then we might have considered a different building block or set of building blocks. But we have what we have because this has evolved over time. And I think our job as international civil servant is to make this work. And Unep then works in the gaps, right? When we identify, and that's the gap report is one such example. Here we have negotiations that are happening and people are making commitments, but then are they meeting them? And then we have within the Biodiversity Convention, well, we need to deal with restoration, etc. But what does that fill in on the climate side? Or what does that fill in on the desertification side? So I think we have found our space. But of course, Julia is right. If it were a different design that we were beginning from scratch today, would we have 17 environmental conventions? I don't know. But that train left the station 50 years ago.
Yeah, but you're actually bringing a point that has come out in this recent report that Unep did that is so fundamental, making peace with nature, where you're right that transforming humanity's relationship with nature is the key to a sustainable future. And so that by definition requires that you engage with all of these issues that all of these various conventions deal with. So how do you envision such a transformation to transform humanity's relationship to nature?
Well, I think obviously, it's sort of not a minor agenda, and I don't want it to sound flip, but the truth is that this sort of make, take, and waste basis upon which our systems are built is simply not going to work. We can't continue to emit or to destroy. We've seen news about the Amazon emitting more than it sequesters just the other day in the news. So we need to understand that each one of us has a role to play, and that equity and fairness and financial solidarity with those who have done very little to be in the world that they're finding themselves in, but will be the first victims of these impending catastrophes if we do not take action, that we do need to integrate that. So the kind of systems, and we need to break it down, first on sustainable consumption and production. Circularity is obvious, SDG 12, but let's understand that we just cannot construct these things, and when we're done with them, we put them in the drawer, we throw them in the garbage. How crazy is that? When everything that we use, and now I just what I have in my desk here, should be designed with circularity in mind. Government guardrails need to be set in to enable that, but that's coming and will come. Similarly, obviously, the way we invest. Yours and my pension, and that 28-year-old who enters a pension fund or whatever should have their pension when they turn 90 still. But if they're investing in something that is going to be a stranded asset, they might not have that pension. So we need to make sure that financial systems shift and shift rapidly so that we, one, do not build any more infrastructure that is carbon emitting or nature destroying without understanding that we don't build any more of that kind of thing. And further, of course, government guardrails can be established as well as industry requirements to make sure of that. And yours and my consumption. We vote in the voting booth, and we should be mindful. And this is not a left or right issue. It is a sustainability issue. We should ask those for whom we vote that they do the right thing, and we hold them to account at the next ballot. But we also vote with our euros and our dollars and our K shillings. And what do we buy? And where is it coming from? And how is it packaged? And what carbon footprint has it? And is it deforestation free? We should demand all of that. So these are the kind of to-dos that then need to fold into the conventions, but the conventions only lay the rules. The rest is where we, Unep, try to bridge between conventions, between science and action. And we have a lot of initiatives that deal with just that.
You point out some very, very important issues, the responsibility that we have as consumers, as citizens, as individuals, but also the responsibility of government. I often say that I would prefer not to take a car, whether it is a Tesla or a Prius. I would like to have a zero emissions flying train, right? From point A to point B. But this is not something that we can necessarily act on as citizens, but this is that kind of innovation that is necessary at the business level and at the government level. And so it's great to see things are happening, they're bubbling up. And I'd love to pivot a little bit. I know we have a lot of questions. And my team is saying people have their hands up, they want to talk, and they really want to be seen. And we'll turn over to that in just a minute. But I want to ask you, because we are in academia, this is where we're grounded at the moment. The knowledge sector has a particular role. And I'd like you to think with us aloud a little bit. What is Unep's role in working with the knowledge sector? And what is our role in academia to work better with Unep and with the UN at large?
Well, I mean, first of all, the fact that there are 142 people, as I can see it in this conversation, is wonderful. You know, we've often talked about getting more people into STEM, a more diverse community in STEM. I speak about getting more people into environmental sciences, environmental diplomacy, environmental politics, environmental law, environmental, pretty much everything, because that will be the mark of a successful future. So educating and providing a space where young people can excel and where they can be part of shaping what comes next becomes critical. On the science side, obviously, many of the universities with which we partner and many of the scientists, just yesterday we released the new methane assessment, for example, is done with a lot of scientists who sit in a lot of very fine academic institutions. So being part of, whether it's IPCC, IPBES, the IRP, or as of yesterday, the methane assessment that just came out, each of these matters and matters greatly because it brings new understanding to the fore. But the understanding is only as good as helping translate that into policy action. And so that also takes sociology and politics and administrators and MBAs and so on and so forth. So we really need to think of environmental work, not as just the environment department of a university, but it is everyone. Let's say architecture, you know, and town planning, city planning. If we continue to plan with the kind of footprint that we've had before, if we continue to plan only with hard infrastructure, we need to integrate green, we need to have a footprint that is densified but livable. All of these things, and obviously green buildings, this is part of what the next generation of educators can do. It's a big shift, but it is entirely possible. It is entirely possible.
This is our mission. We're going to take it to heart. Now you've met our dean, we'll go to the dean and propose very concrete actions of how we can engage. And I want to open up here a little bit, turn it over to Natalia, who's been monitoring Q&A, and Anna, who's been monitoring the chat. You can come in and see what questions are coming in and who's raised hands. I see a lot of hands are being raised. So in the spirit of a town hall, global town hall, with the Anchor Institution director, we open it up. Natalia, what are you seeing in the chat and the Q&A?
So thank you, Maria, and thank you, Director Andersen, for your insight. It has been very valuable, and it goes hand in hand with what you said on the book about Unip being the champion of the earth. and all those discussions that you have on your conclusion about the type of organization that is needed to continue responding to that growing list that was mentioned at the beginning. So that definitely connects on that. We have about 20 questions up to now, so I'm trying to put them together in a way that is efficient with the time and that tries to merge the different topics. So I apologize if I'm missing some of the origins of the questions, but one topic that is definitely there is the ambitions for Unep at 50, like what comes out of this process and this big celebration for the organization. And our attendees would like to know which are those plans, and also how this connects, especially with the celebration of the 50th anniversary also of the Stockholm conference, and which other initiatives may come up with that. John Matuszak, formerly at the State Department Director of Multilateral Affairs, that had years of experience on this, is specifically asking if there are ideas for a convention on equality or other topics that also the current health crisis have brought to the attention. So that will be the first point in the discussion. What now with Unip at 50, and how specifically connect with those issues.
Well, thank you. And it's great to see John Matuszak here, so thank you. And let me just say first that, so as at this point of speaking, what is clear, because UNEA that happened in February, we call it UNEA 5.1 because of the pandemic, we had to cut it in two, did decide that there shall be a celebration of Unep at 50 at UNEA 5.2, which pandemic permitting will happen in, I believe it's February of 2022. I can't recall the exact dates, but it's everywhere. And so there are a 2-day period, one afternoon and a morning, or the other way around, or during which time this Unep at 50 celebration. Now that will be happening after the closure of 5.2, which means that it's a new presidency, which will be an African presidency that will celebrate the Unep at 50. Now, any number of things are on the docket for UNEA 5.2. There are, including, as people will know, we've been in an ad hoc open-ended expert group that deals with marine litter and plastic. Now, where does that land? It's still out for conversation, but there are different voices that would see different landing points of that. Is it an agreement / convention? Is it an expert group? Is it something else? To be determined, but that is going through the mill as we speak. We clearly would want to see, and there's also an expectation that part of the conversation around environmental law and environmental governance will land. Now, there are different levels of ambitions, because you will recall the French proposal back in the day on a pact for the global environment. That has had a complex journey, and anyone who's been following that will be aware of it. I don't have time to go into it now, but it's no longer a pact for the global environment. That thing got shelved, and there's been it's been discussed. UN UNGA, the General Assembly, sort of punted it over to UNEP and to UNEA to reflect on this, and it is in reflection mode. But clearly, one of the things that I want to see land from all of this is that we strengthen national environmental law. And I think, because at the end of the day, and I believe in conventions, don't get me wrong, but they're only as good as the promises you've made get implemented on the ground. And so in countries where environmental law is weak, or where implementation of same struggles, you can only get so far. And I think here, the process of, some of you will be aware of something called the Montevideo program. It's quite important, and it supports countries on the front end with this. So we'll see where it all lands, but clearly one of the elements, aside from the plastic and so on, is let's get clear about environmental law. And we have a very, very ambitious program in environmental law. And I refer to both science within Unep and environmental law as foundational. They are the thing upon which the rest is built. And if that is wobbly, then frankly, the rest becomes declaratory in nature and will not necessarily deliver. I hope I have answered it. Oh, Stockholm. So that is still in discussion. Our friends in Sweden have offered to host a conference in Stockholm. Remember, in Stockholm, lots of things got launched, including ourselves, but there were any number of things and any number of NGOs that also sprung out from that. And of course, I mean, we had the Brundtland report, and we also saw the World Heritage Convention being founded around that time. So lots of things were in the hopper. And so we certainly are very much working with our Swedish friends to see how we can also add value. As we understand it, well, not as we understand it, it's still in discussion for New York, whether it will go through a United Nations enabling resolution as it's referred, or whether it will be something else. But we will know that in the next few months, I expect, and then we'll be able to have clarity. But clearly, having something in Sweden would be super interesting. Having something in Kenya is given. That's happening. And so we look forward to building a bridge between the two.
Thank you, Inger. I just want to react quickly to your environmental law comment, because indeed, having studied the foundations of Unep, the vision, and how it has performed over the years, environmental law is absolutely critical. And not only is it one of its most substantive contributions, but it's also an area that we dove into, and with Natalia a few years ago when she was just starting her PhD, and at the request of Unep, Inger, at the request of Bradney Chambers, the late Bradney Chambers, who came to us and said, Maria, can your center do a paper on the effectiveness of multilateral environmental agreements? And we said, sure, let's study them. And here we have a new PhD student, Natalia, who will take this on. Wonderful. And we dove into that, and we saw we cannot decide, we can't study the effectiveness until we know whether they're being implemented. And no one has actually tracked the implementation very carefully. And this is what we did, and created the Environmental Conventions Index that takes the national reports that countries submit to the secretariats, all of the answers, codes them, and gives them a score from 0 to 5, and assesses to what extent countries implement the commitments that they have taken on. We find a very counterintuitive and a positive story. Many developing countries are performing much better than we think. Many other countries, mine included, Bulgaria, my country of origin, is number 1 on performance on the Basel Convention of Transboundary Movement hazardous waste, which we didn't expect, which Bulgaria doesn't know. And so what we have now started, and what we're working with Unep, with the law division, with countries like Rwanda, that is taking leadership to find these stories, to articulate these positive stories, enable countries like Rwanda, like Colombia, like Bulgaria, to actually be leaders and to be examples of other peer countries on their implementation of their multilateral commitments. So this is a project that we're working on. We're developing and working with Unep quite actively, and with countries. So I just wanted to put that on the agenda as part of this discussion. But Natalia, what other questions are coming in?
So that definitely connects with a couple of questions that we got about the role of Unep regarding the conventions and how it can go beyond filling the gaps. That was a question that we got from Janos Pastor, a former senior advisor for the UN Secretary General on climate change. So that connects to that discussion and also the mechanisms of capacity building. But I wanted to bring also the issue of raising awareness for the environment, especially in the current situation. And we got a couple of questions about that and about how Unep can deal with the challenge of the low awareness that the environment may be getting in some countries that are also dealing with other policy challenges that on top of that got exacerbated by the current health crisis. So from your perspective, what would be like the recommendation there and the support to change that lack of belief from different countries and some organizations, even other actors from the private sector, about the importance of the environment and the relevance of these topics?
You know, I hear this, but I will say that whereas some of you will have seen this article, it came out about, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. It looked at awareness around, you know, climate change and biodiversity and how much they had been mentioned in the media. And I will say that since Rio, there has been, and at Rio, there was a greater understanding around biodiversity and a more limited understanding about climate. This is, of course, completely juxtaposed at this time. I will say, however, across the board, there is a much, much, much deeper awareness on environmental issues across the board than there was when I started out back in the day, 100 years ago. So I think that, and the credit goes in large part to activist youth, right? The credit goes in large part to people sort of having realized, and you were part, I mean, many of the folks who are present here are part of that this just doesn't compute. It doesn't add up. It doesn't deliver the future that these younger people want to see for themselves and their children. So clearly, what my generation and those that have gone before have done has not been adequate. So first point is, I think there is a growing awareness, and I celebrate that at every moment that I can. But secondly, what we, and you know, you may not see what we're doing, but we are out there in ways that we have never been before. We had millions of kids in Earth School. We've had, excuse me, an amazing, I mean, we publish a lot, both in terms of sort of science and assessment, but also more accessible publication that people can use. And in countries where we're active, and of course we are a small organization, we are very much working with youth. We're also seeking, and with awareness raising, we're also seeking to work through others. And here I have some amazing colleagues, you know, who work with the gaming industry. Who would have known? But you know, there are billions of kids and adults who are playing games. And this is anyone who has a teenager in the home will know this. And so so placing also environmental consciousness within games, actual placement of environmental dimensions in the game design themselves is part of it. Now, I'm not saying that that is all, but I'm saying that each of these is a building block. I'm not seeking to simplify, but I do think that being, and I will say also, we have very much enjoyed strong support, the Champions of the Earth program. Just the other day, maybe a month or two ago, Prince William said he would like to have a conversation with the winners of the Champions of the Earth. So we sat down with the champions, with Prince William, and you know, you get someone like that who's interested, then you get millions of people who will see and hear and understand. So we have a lot of friends as well out there who are doing their thing, but who are reaching in with us, and that gives us tremendous outreach. And, you know, if I may just come back to the filling the gaps, and this because I think it was Janos who asked that, and there were a few others, and just, Maria is frozen on my screen. I hope she's not frozen on yours.
It seems to be a general problem, but we're already checking with her, no worries.
Okay, fine. So just on the filling of the gaps, look, there will be no, at this point, I think the political reality is one that there will not be an Uber treaty that sort of pulls the whole thing together with a nice red bow around it. But Janos is, of course, right. And everyone is right. It is our job to relentlessly work on understanding how this interface works. And that's between the conventions and making sure that that space does not widen, but rather that we close it. And I think one of the things that we have been doing is bringing together, of course, COP26, COP15, as well as the upcoming COP on desertification, and the chemicals COPs, which are also coming up, and looking at how we can, and with the executive secretary, how we can design building blocks that mutually support these. And I think we are getting somewhere. It's very exciting to see the chemical biodiversity conversations, and it is really moving forward in very, very interesting ways. And whether it's pesticides, nitrogen, insecticides, heavy toxic, heavy metals, etc., obviously has a direct impact, not only in times on climate, but certainly also on biodiversity.
So moving into another direction, there's a lot of people here engaged in academia, working with the students, working with the younger generations. So can you tell us a little bit about how you envision the work of Unep with these younger generations, and how the programs that you have are being shaped to ensure that there is an enhanced engagement there, and that also the younger generations feel more and more as part of the work of the organization and connect with the different programs that it has?
I mean, we're not done. This, I will say, we still have some way to journey, right? I think and it's part because we're not out there having an office in every country, and we can meet with youth from every country and enable them to be a voice within our organization. But the good thing is that we have a super active young the youth and children group within Unep, and they organized, and it was phenomenal, a youth UNEA. We've also enabled that they could do a GEO for youth, a global environmental outlook for youth. It's so hip, it's so cool. It's got an app. It's completely the kind of things that old fuddy-duddies could not have come up with, but these youngsters did, and it really works. So I think even though we are not this massive agency like, say, UNDP that has 18,000 staff and a footprint in every country, we've tried to be as innovative as we can to reach out to youth. But we need to get better at, especially now, for example, when we did the Making Peace with Nature report, we insisted that there needed to be young people within the scientific team. And that was really, really good. But we're not consistent about it. And there are some of these elements that are a little bit further away from Unip, say the IPCC work, say the IPBES work. And there I would like to see absolutely assurance that young people are inside the research and the work that is coming out. And ditto for delegations. What would it look like, and Maria's back now, what would it look like if we sort of, and this is what we will now do, encourage, and I have done, that every delegation should have youth on the delegation. It matters. If you are on the delegation, you're part of the meetings, you sit when they do strategy, you understand why they want to do, not just as the group, the special group on women and children, but inside the delegation. That also becomes empowering. I, of course, can't force that, but I can strongly encourage, which I will.
Thank you. And we see in the chat lots of suggestions and ideas about youth-related initiatives that can be used for reference in different aspects of the work that the organization does. So Maria, you're back. I'll pass it back to you because we're 4 minutes from the hour. So if you want to go from there.
Thank you. Yes, these are the challenges of the modern world, right? My internet connection just dropped. It's just dropped. So there was a scrambling here in my house to reconnect and And there we are, we're back. So as a result, I've lost all chat, but we have a team for this. So I realize we are at three minutes. And I just want to end with one question, Inger, that I had on my mind, but I also see that Andreas, the founder of Ecologic, also posed it. What is your vision for Unep at 100? I was going to ask Unep at 75, because I do hope to write the book that is Unep at 75. But give us the vision of the Unep at 100.
So we would have made peace with nature. And what would that mean? It would mean that we have deployed our knowledge, our science, our insight, new technology, digital AI, all the tools that we have in the toolbox, as well as our imagination, to really get at all these promises that we've made over the decades to deliver them. You know, we have to start right now. If we want to land there, whether it's at 75 or it is at 100, having made peace with nature, it starts today. It starts by implementing the commitments that we made under the conventions, that we made them in Paris. We made them on biodiversity in Nagoya in 2010, and we haven't lived up to them. Now we're going to meet in Kunming. So we make these commitments stick through environmental law, through activism, through science, and through organizations like Unep issuing quote unquote report cards, but anyway, on how we're doing and how countries are committing. And so whether it is on climate change, whether it is on biodiversity, or whether it is on the post-2020 chemicals framework, which also we need to think about, is there plus. So that's sort of, we've made peace with nature, and we are proactively looking into the horizon as that Unip at 75 or 50, identifying that next environmental wave that's going to come to our shores way before it hits. So we do better monitoring, but not just the monitoring and telling the world. We enable through legal agreements and through commitments that these get delivered in a way such that the Sustainable Development Goals that come to fruition in 2030 have been delivered, but that we are living in harmony with nature in a net zero world, or in a zero climate changing world, and with in a pollution-free planet. These are kind of the where we have to get to, and we better get there well before 75, to be quite honest with you. We should get there by 2030, but by 20, whenever it is, 75 years, we will have arrived. That must be our collective goal.
Yes, and thank you, Inger. I think this is a very motivating call for the young people, but also I would call to action the 50-year-olds. The 50-year-olds, those that were born around the time that Unep was born. I think we have a responsibility as we enter our 50s to actually work with Unep, work with the United Nations, work with the younger generations, work with the older generations, and move forward. I just want to say that we do have now my team is saying the winner of the book, based on engagement in the chat, the winner of this book is Dr. Kalpana Chowdhury from the Institute of Sustainable Development and Research in India. We will be in touch, and we will be sending you a hard copy of the book. And with this, I would like to thank you, Inger, very much for being here, for joining us today. Thank everybody who connected. And I would like to ask you to join us for our next event on June 3rd with Achim Steiner, the former executive director of Unep and currently the administrator of UNDP. And we will continue this dialogue series on Unep at 50 as we imagine how this organization could move forward and really be the environmental conscience as Executive Director Inger Andersen just pointed out in the beginning of this inaugural dialogue of the Unep at 50 series. Thank you very much for joining us. Please submit your untold story of Unep as we start the next book on Unep at 75. We are looking for the stories that many of you hold about its performance, about its delivery, about the dreams that the organization and its people have. So with this, thank you very much for being here today. Inger, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your wisdom, and we look forward to working with you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.